ahead and get started. Good morning, maybe good afternoon where you are. Thank you for joining us for this roundtable today. I want to thank our great partners at NOTA, the Association for Orientation, Transition, and Retention, for joining NIRSA today, the Association for Campus Recreation, to offer this content around how our campuses are pivoting some of those orientation and transition programs. We're joined today by several colleagues from University of Indiana and Virginia Tech, and they've got some great programming ideas to share with all of you. If you haven't been on one of these roundtables before, this is just an open Zoom meeting format, so please keep yourself on mute. We do encourage you to actively use the chat. So you can say hi to one another, post questions for the panelists. If you also have ideas you want to share from your campus, please feel free to put those in the chat, describe them briefly, add a link, however you'd like to do that. I'll monitor the chat, and after our colleagues get done presenting some of their initial ideas, we'll open it up for questions. I'll pull questions out of the chat. If someone has a great question or even a great idea, I may call on you to come off mute and say a little bit more about that for the whole group. So that's the plan for today. So let's start with a couple introductions. So we'll start with our friends at University of Indiana. So Kathy, why don't you go first?
I just sent a chat out to everybody. Man, it's just so neat to see faces because we didn't get to do that in Tempe. But Kathy Bayless, the Executive Director for Campus Recreational Sports at Indiana University.
Very good. And Mandy?
Hi everyone, Mandy McGhee here. Good to see some people. I'm the Service Director for Participant Engagement, Outreach, and Relational Service at Indiana University. Good to be here.
Great, great, thank you. And Melanie?
Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Melanie Payne. I am at IU as well. I serve as the director of the Office of First Year Experience Programs and have worked with orientation for a number of years. I also am finalizing in my last year on the president team with the NOTA. So I am serving as past president up until January. So I have that connection as well to this group.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, and Chris.
Hi everybody, I do evaluation, special events, and special projects at Indiana University, and I've had the pleasure of working with Melanie for the last 20 years on orientation related projects, and so excited to hear what everybody's got planned.
Great. All right, and we'll move on to our friends at Virginia Tech. Kelly, let's start with you.
Hey everyone, my name is Kelly McPherson, and I am just finishing up my first year in a new position at Virginia Tech in recreation. I'm the events coordinator. Very lucky to have jumped into a role that already had very strong relationships with our new student and family programs. So I kind of instantly had a family in another group on campus, and we've been able to work really well together.
Fabulous. And Chad.
And good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chad Zoller. I'm the Assistant Director for Transitions within the office. So my role is more focusedly on the Welcome Week and post-orientation transitional initiatives, but we've also all taken up a heavy role in the planning of our online orientation experience, and that's all within our new student and family programs office at Virginia Tech.
Good, fabulous. All right, I should also mention that we are recording this session, and it'll be made available on NIRSA's website. We'll also get it sent over to NOTA so they can distribute it in their channels. The chat, the public chat, so when you send anything to everyone, will also get saved with the recording, which is great. If you end up private messaging one of your colleagues or me or whatever, that doesn't get saved. So if you find value in today and need to, flip back and find a resource in the chat or remember what someone said, the recordings will be available probably later today, no later than tomorrow morning. Or if you want to forward the link to colleagues who may also benefit from this, feel free to do that. So we're going to go ahead and kick this off with Virginia Tech, and we'll start with Kelly, who's going to share a little bit about their programming and how they've pivoted in the pandemic.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to start really just with some highlights from last year and some thoughts about some pivoting. And then, of course, we would love to hear some ideas. And with so many people joining in, it's hard to know who has done what on their campus. So I'm looking forward to being able to brainstorm together. In 2019, during Welcome Week, which was a 4-day period at Virginia Tech, we did 8 different events together with our Welcome Week partners. That was rec and new student and family programs. So I was going to highlight our largest one and our smallest one. Both have different obstacles in 2020 in being able to present that to students. So of course things will look different. The first event that I wanted to talk about was Rec Fest. I came into this position and Rec Fest was already sort of an idea. And I actually think that other schools have a similar event. When I was researching, I didn't see a whole lot out there. So we really got to create whatever we wanted it to be for our students at Virginia Tech. So just so you guys can sort of visualize, what it ended up being was we were on our large turf fields. So a large open spaced area with climbing wall and mechanical bull and ice cream and a DJ. So really a fun social time. The number one goal, besides getting them outside active and social, was to introduce them to all things rec. So we had all of our departments there. We had sport club teams and presidents there to recruit and talk to new students. Our aquatics group was there next to the dunking booth. We had intramurals and we had fitness out there, giving students an opportunity to test their flexibility and strength with tire flipping. The cool thing that came out of that is while we were providing activities for students, we organically saw them break into groups, and some of them started playing soccer and some of them brought their own spike balls. So it really became this place, first of all, in a facility that is sort of to the outside of our campus. So a lot of new students probably didn't know it was there. So one goal was to introduce them to another facility on campus where they could become familiar and know that they could come back later and be active with their friends in this space. So as we look towards 2020, this was a 1,500 plus student event. So when we talk about groups of 50 to 100 and equipment that everyone's going to touch and be on, there are a lot of obstacles in our planning. We are planning to come back in the fall, but we don't know at what capacity. So we've been sort of planning a tiered return. So I do think that putting our sport club presidents on Zoom in front of new students and being able to do sort of a roundtable and get them acquainted with what we have to offer is an option. Being able, I think it's just going to have to look totally different. We want students to be in groups and be active. On that field, they can spread out. I think we just need to be careful about the types of activities that we're offering at that time. I think our goals can still be met and we can introduce them to all of the things that rec has to offer. The second event was actually my favorite event that we put on, and it was a smaller scale. We offered a morning run twice, Thursday morning and Friday morning of that first week. I'm a mom of a cross-country runner, so we invited people to just meet our running club. We had maybe 15 members, and we have a trail that sort of crosses and goes around campus and town. And so students were able to meet together. Our largest number was 78. We sort of paired them off according to distance and pace. And it made my mom heart happy, because those were the kids like mine that are going to end up on this huge campus, and immediately they found their people. And they found a club they could join, and they had leaders to show them places around town. So that made me really excited. Like, that's what it's all about, is making campus feel smaller and finding, I mean, that's why we have living learning communities. So you can find common interests. So that one I think is easy. It's outdoors. Even if 100 people come, we met at the same turf field. We could spread them all out and give them directions and still send them off in small groups. So I'm excited, because I feel like even with social distancing and some other rules in place, that's one that I think is easy to be able to still gather together. And it's an important one.
Sorry, I had to get myself off mute. That's excellent, Kelly. And I really like what you said around, really paying attention to the core goals for these events, and still honoring those core goals and purposes for these events, even though the way you execute on that goal may have to shift a little bit. Chad, did you want to jump in and talk about your perspective on those events?
Yeah, absolutely. I would also really uplift the work Kelly and her team has been doing in the virtual setting as well, because they did have to pivot very quickly at the end of the spring semester for us. So their ability to even adapt a lot of those bigger events. For those of you who might be familiar with Virginia Tech, the 3.2 for 32 run is one of the biggest events on our entire campus. And then being able to provide that virtually was just, again, the creativity and ingenuity that went into it. And so those are also things that we're really thinking critically about, because we have hypothetical models in place where if all students aren't on campus and some are starting the semester virtually, how are we still engaging them with things like rec sports and those areas that it's very hard and difficult to not have that community space where we're able to do that together, but how are you still really having those opportunities available virtually for those students? And a little more about our partnership aspect. Kelly sits on both the Welcome Week Committee and our Orientation Implementation Committee, and that's been super critical because they've been able to uplift the work we've been doing, but also we're able to support them through our ability with new students and their families to make them become aware of the different events and opportunities, and also the resources that they do provide within their facilities and within their team dynamic as well.
Yeah, and I would add too, an event like RecFest doesn't happen without the partnership. They're sharing funding with us to entice students to get there. They are giving us volunteers, so we have someone at every apparatus and game situation that we're offering to students. So without the manpower and the money power, it doesn't work on that larger scale.
Great, and we had a quick question before we move on to IU about, do you require students to attend this, or is it optional? And maybe how do you incentivize students to show up and engage?
So RecFest is completely optional, and in the planning of the first year, we were a little iffy on the location because it was a little bit of a walk, so we weren't sure anyone would show up. So through our partnership, we were able to, our new students are broken into 6 different color families, so we were able to make 200 t-shirts that said RecFest in each color. So the first 1,200 students got a free t-shirt. We offered 500 scoops of free ice cream from the local ice cream parlor. So when they came in, they got a ticket. So there was definitely incentive. But I do think that since students stayed long after it was over and we're sort of still gathering and playing and moving together, once we got them there, they stayed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, well, let's turn it over to IU now, and Kathy's going to kick us off with some of their events and how they're thinking about the pivots that'll be necessary this summer and fall.
Thank you for joining. We too are very eager to hear and learn from you all. I shared with Pam the interest in kind of explaining first the strategy for us that really drives the choices that we've been making, as well as those that we know we're going to need to be making an adjustment. And there are numerous ones. We serve a campus now of, well, typically it would be about 43,000 students. And we're still eager to know what that enrollment's going to look like. But nonetheless, philosophically, we understood how critical it was to get to freshmen, recognizing that in our environment, freshmen all live on campus unless they have some peculiarity that gives them an exemption. And a lot of freshmen come from rural Indiana, where a lot of these activities and opportunities are much more limited, and they may not have anywhere near the understanding of the scope and variety that we can afford them. Because every student pays a mandatory student fee, and it supports 70% of our operating budget by the choice of students. We feel it's incumbent upon us to do everything possible to let them know what they're getting from their student fee. And so right away, we want to get to those freshmen to have them understand those things. We also recognize that a lot of individuals, regardless of age or class standing, have, shall we say, some psychological attitude, preconceived notions about the bodies that they need to have, the skill set that they need to have. So we, with great intentionality, make our activities all about an outreach to be inclusive, to demonstrate that this is fun, that there's a lot that's low barrier, that there's a continuum that can accommodate them, from the first timer or the reluctant activity person to the real gym rat. But we believe, kind of like the Maya Angelou statement, people may not remember what you did for them, but they will remember how you made them feel. And so we put such an emphasis on relational service, connection, demonstrating that we're caring people, that we really want to hear from them, what their needs and expectations are, and then use that in how we design and deliver the things that we've been typically able to deliver prior to COVID. So I have two team members here that can address what those specific outreaches have been. And then also Melanie Payne, who is the director for IU for our orientations programming, is just such a strategic and important business partner. But beyond business, we have the same philosophy and values. And so it makes that relationship so simpatico. We know what we're trying to accomplish. We don't have to argue with each other. It's more, how do we help each other be as successful as possible so students find a place to belong and connect quickly and have opportunity to learn new things. The other strategic thing that we have the benefit of is a person who is a senior associate director for first year experience, happens to be the chairperson of our campus recreational sports advisory board. And so we have worked with Sarah when she was back in residential programs and services, and we have the benefit of these long-standing relationships that have evolved over decades, literally, in our case. So we've been adapting and evolving with each iteration of orientation. And so I'm going to stop and let maybe Chris start. Well, no, actually, Mandy, why don't you with the sneak peek, because that's the precursor that feeds also to RecFest and how long we've been doing that, and the ways we're now trying to think through how do we break that apart and deliver it in smaller sets by going out to where some students are, creating some of the physical distancing, the shared virtual programming, and the lessons we still want to learn from IU on what those possibilities may be.
Sure. So I'll give an overview of what exactly our sneak peek program is. So, you know, students, incoming freshmen, are coming onto campus in a normal summertime for a couple of days for their orientation experience. And we've been fortunate enough to work with the FYE office to have a designated time for an hour in the evening on their first day on campus, where they're going to come to our Student Recreational Sports Center, one of our two facilities, and we're giving them an introduction to recreational sports, what we have to offer them, and just give them a really nice experience and an introduction to us and what they can expect in the fall. So the purpose is we really want to connect with them in a very engaged way, a very personal way, make that connection to them. You know, as maybe 5 years ago when we would do this program, it was very structured when they arrived. They went on a tour. We have special staff that we're hiring that are student employees who are super passionate about recreational sports, who are really good ambassadors for us. And they're taking students through the facility on this tour and experience, and we were giving them lots of information. We wanted them to hear everything they could possibly know about recreational sports, to try and find a way to connect with them and for them to see themselves, oh, I think I might want to try yoga, or, you know, I played basketball in high school. I would love to do intramural sports. And those were great experiences. What we found is after a long day of orientation, students are very tired. They are overloaded with information. They've got a lot of very important and great information that they've gotten on the academic side, of things. And so sometimes when they would come to us, they are just, ooh, they are deer in the headlights. So we've shifted our focus a little bit to make sure we had three main things to accomplish. Number one, we wanted them to leave their experience that evening thinking, this was the best part of my day. This was so fun. We wanted them to understand what they get with their student activity fee. So when they get on campus in the fall and they have their student ID, what can I do? What's available to me? And then we also wanted them to understand where our facilities are. We have two main facilities and what's available at those facilities and all of the unlimited options that they have. So it was a wonderful program. They left with a t-shirt. Everyone got a t-shirt. We had sponsors there who they did their own giveaways, and it was just a really fun experience. So with virtual orientation happening this year, unfortunately, we're losing that opportunity to meet face-to-face with students, and we're working to figure out how we're going to make those connections still. And we've done a few things already. We've had the opportunity to produce a video that's a part of the virtual orientation program. So students are going to see that. And we really tried to make that video reflect the same principles that we want them to get in their in-person experience. So it was, it's very lively, it's very upbeat. We're showing a range of activities and all the things they can do, and still trying to communicate those same things about our facilities, the student activity fee. Another opportunity we have to connect with those incoming freshmen this summer is to engage in provide a virtual program via Zoom. So we're still working out the details with that, but it will be an evening in July, and we're going to provide probably a group exercise session, something low barrier that lots of people can fill, that they can participate in easily. And that will just be another way to introduce ourselves to students. Okay, I think that wraps up Sneak Peek. Chris, do you want to speak about RecFest?
So RecFest, similar to what Kelly's doing in Vermont. We have all of our club teams there. We also do group exercise demos. So there's lots of, music. We do log rolling in the kiddie pool out on the grass. And so we try to have just as much interaction and fun activities. But as I always tell our staff, you guys are the star of the show. Bring your most engaging staff so that you can connect and give that information to students, but do it in a way that makes them think like they may not remember all the details, but they're going to remember like, I want to be there kind of thing. And we're fortunate that we do have sponsors. I also, just as a little background, because I know having been a NIRSA member for a long time, when the larger schools are talking, sometimes it's hard for me, if I'm at a school of 1,000, to figure that out. But that's where I came from. The original campus, I was at a regional campus at the University of Pittsburgh where we had 1,000 students. And so I can kind of see how we can scale these things up and down to meet the needs of our campus community. So please don't let any of this kind of make you think that only applies to large schools. You just figure out how that fits for the different size campus and kind of the nature of your campus. But we had the sponsors that were doing giveaways, food, if you have fun, food, music, you've got a good thing going on there, and they're going to stop and try and engage. And so we also look at ways that we can kind of measure impact and connections, because we know that these things are not inexpensive. Not only in terms of financial resources, but just the physical resources and how much, we start Thursday night at 6 o'clock setting up, and we're busy until 6 o'clock on Friday after it ends, and it's a 2-hour event. So we've got all hands on deck for our facility support. So if you're adding kind of those indirect costs in, it's not inexpensive. And so you want to make sure that it's having the impact that you want. So I think it's important to think of, I should say this, pre-COVID, it was important to think of what kind of metrics, because I think we'll have different metrics right now. Right now, it's just how many people can we make campus feel vibrant for and have opportunities to do things in a different way as opposed to other ways. We had 3,000 students that would attend RecFest. We would try to look at, and with Sneak Peek, it was 2,600 or 2,700. And so we would try to look at what impact did that have on their engagement with recreational sports? Were they any more or less engaged than students that didn't do those things? Did they engage any earlier than students that didn't do those things? And so I think we're just going to have to come up with different measures of success for this kind of pre-COVID year or COVID year that we're in, kind of to show value, because I know I'll have accountability that we need to, but I think really it's the campus is looking for things for students to do safely and for them kind of still get that Hoosier experience or whatever that is for your respective campus communities.
Yeah, and Chris, you briefly mentioned sponsors, and I know, you know, local sponsors, sometimes even national sponsors are a big part of RecFest and RecFest type activities. Have you had any early conversations with your sponsors or conversations internally about how that aspect of these events may need to change this year?
We haven't yet because we're still trying to figure out what opportunities they were going to be able to provide them, because we know that it's the face-to-face that they value. So the two events they gravitate to. So we have a good color run that has 1,000 students that attend that. That's not as appealing because everybody's so hyped up and all over the place that they don't really get that chance to kind of demo their product or present their product to them. But sneak peek, even though it's just a short interaction, it still gives them that little face-to-face time. Same thing with RecFest, they still get that. So it's going to be a challenge to see what that looks like. And to be honest with you, I've had very few of them reach out to me at this point yet. I mean, we've been working with the same ones for years, so I don't think that'll be a problem. But it's just been interesting that I think everybody's in that okay, let's wait and see how this plays out. We know that Rec Sports will get a hold of us and they'll do it safely. So let's just hunker down and see. They're honestly probably worried about getting their own businesses open. I know that one of our big bookstores in town actually just eliminated their whole marketing department. So trying to reconnect and find out who that new person is and what their plans are and how we can kind of tie into that. But yeah, for sure, that's something that we're looking at. We're going to be sending out some communication this week, just letting them know, hey, we're working on plans for Welcome Week. We don't have them yet. We're anticipating there were some people that just did sneak peek that they'll move over since that went virtual. And we'll just have to see how that goes. But yeah, good question.
Yeah. Okay, Melanie, how about if you can share a little bit from your perspective about all these great ideas at IU?
Well, we certainly, I will acknowledge that I think maybe Kathy may have said, or no, Chris just said, sometimes it's hard to personalize something when your school is structured differently or whatever. And I know we're in kind of a unique scenario that most of us have worked together for so many years. It's while I haven't been the director of FYE for that long, I have worked with orientation, and I was orientation director for a number of years. And that's kind of an anomaly in orientation world. Not a lot of people stay in orientation for 25 years. So while I acknowledge that, I think a couple of things that I'd like to highlight with the work that Rec Sports does on our campus. We didn't always have RecFest. We didn't always have Sneak Peek. Those started somewhere. And when they started, and then every year since, we do revisit the goals and we do revisit the vision and the purpose. And I think for those of us in orientation and first year world in particular, that's been very valuable, certainly to me, to my staff, in understanding kind of our role in it as well. Here's a couple of things that I noted as you all were talking is when I think about Sneak Peek and where that started and some of the common themes, even though it has evolved over the years, if you're not doing something like that and you want to start it, getting its purpose, its values, its goals. But the one thing that Kathy said early on is it's not just about, we know there's students who would spend their entire orientation experience at the Rec Sports Center because they can't wait to get in there. And then there's students who don't envision themselves ever going there because that's not what they do. So what I've appreciated is conversations about making it inclusive and accepted, comfortable to go in. And I think that's the of our role is getting students in there, even if they're not thinking, I'm not the workout kind of person. So through the years, we've done different things. We have added activities there that gets me in the door, but I don't have to feel like I need to look a certain way or be a certain way. And maybe we'll just have an activity in the lobby where they can do some service things or they can chat with staff, or so making it comfortable to get them in that door the first time, because we know that if they get in there the first time, the second time it's going to be a little less daunting. So if nothing else, I think that's our role. And for Rec Sport and the RecFest in the fall, that also started from scratch. Sure, it was a long time ago. We've been doing this for a long time and it's evolved. But when we first started doing it, that relationship and us committing to our role in getting students to it, kind of the same thing for me, is if we are going to value this as part of our campus, and we do, we need to help students access and feel like this is something that can be a part of their world. I am a sucker, I will admit it, for tradition and culture and creating a culture. And I can very confidently say, because I'm the person who started Welcome Week years ago at IU, and with people like our colleagues here, I can confidently say that RecFest is one of our biggest Welcome Week events. Now, it's going to have to look differently. We know that for this year. We just got yesterday the real picture of what our campus is going to look like, what the president sent out, our provost sent out the information. So we finally have some structure to work towards. So that's kind of exciting for us. And I know all of us have been in limbo for a while. But now that we know that, we can start playing a little bit. Coordinating Welcome Week, we are asking people who typically do Welcome Week events to rethink and start thinking through how they can do it. And either should we bring in small groups and do it several times, do extend events. We're going to look at Welcome Week going beyond what we traditionally do in 5 to 7 days. We will extend it. We will add events on, and so I'm sure that our connection with our recreational sports friends will extend as well, and we can do more events just in different ways. I think, I mean, that's good enough for my little intro, but whether you're starting this off, whether you currently have a relationship, I don't think that is insignificant in working together to create what it should be like and what the purpose is. And I highly value that, and we are happy to market, to nudge. We try really hard. We don't schedule other things against sneak peek at orientation when we're in person. And it is a part of their schedule, not just oh, hey, when you're, stop by there. So intentionality, I think, is at the heart of what we do.
Thank you. And Kathy, you wanted to jump in on this as well?
Yeah, I've been watching the chat as it's unfolding too, and I really appreciate the commitment that's surfacing on how do we challenge ourselves to think about smaller groups. And I think it will be a challenge, but I'm married to that notion because I didn't know that much about Zoom, and now I'm so immersed in it. Zoom is a 4-letter word. And one of the things that's always been important to us as a driver is to recognize that what we do is a way to enhance community. And I think what we're longing for is some semblance again of being in community. And while I'm grateful for Zoom and the opportunity to see faces and to talk to people from all across the country, I want to touch you, and I know I can't. So we're going to challenge ourselves to do the virtual and do it in a quality fashion and try and do it in a relevant way and an entertaining way where possible, but really examine, if necessary, do we change our whole way of thinking and start considering affinity groups where we know there's some commonalities, and because there's still a herd mentality. Even as I'm watching campus reopen and the community reopen, people are not social distancing, they're in packs. And it's because they're longing for social connection. So how can we create those opportunities in a safer way? And might it be by thinking about affinity groups like student organizations, international students? I don't know what they may be on our respective campuses, but I'd like to just put that out there too.
Yeah, and we're also getting some good questions, around inclusion. And I think one of the happy surprises for recreation was, many, if not virtually all campuses flipped some level of programming to virtual. And one of the easier things to do was, of course, fitness classes. And what they found was comments back from students who were never willing to walk into a group exercise class, but they were willing to engage in a fitness activity from the privacy of their own home, right? And so, Melanie, you had a really nice way of talking about really trying to think through, how do we get people into the door? How do we fight some of those, perceptions about who should and shouldn't, be a part of recreation programming? And I believe, so if anyone else wants to jump in on this, I think we'll see some opportunities actually with all of this to actually be more inclusive and have some of the traditional barriers go away. And I wonder if that's somewhere buried in a hybrid model, right? Our campuses are contemplating hybrid models, some in person, some online. We're seeing a variety of models of that unfold. And so I wonder in this, get them in the door mentality, right? So maybe there is a little bit of online or Zoom or otherwise to get that door open, while ultimately still the goal is to have an in-person experience. So does anyone have any thoughts or comments on that, either from the panelists or from the audience? Mandy?
Yeah, I will say we have launched a Rec Sports at Home series where we're offering, we drop about 5 to 6 new sessions every Monday, and it's open to everyone. Anyone who is on the internet can utilize these sessions. We're offering a variety from, dance-based to like Zumba to total body to shorter, like just an upper body workout. So we're offering content now, and the plan is to continue to offer that content as we go into the fall, because we know not everyone is going to feel comfortable maybe coming into our facilities amid the pandemic, but we still want them to have the opportunity to participate and engage with us. So I think that's going to be really important. We're also going to start doing some live sessions. Kind of everything we've done now has been on demand. So anytime if you want to jump in and do something at midnight, you can do that. But we're looking in June to start doing some on-demand live, more interactive sessions. We've done some test sessions, which it's interesting doing a workout on Zoom with other people. It was actually really fun, and it kind of made you feel more connected to people. So I think that'll be important. And then we're also looking at how do we then safely phase in some in-person group exercise sessions. Can we do that safely? So I think offering something for everyone, wherever they're at, wherever their comfort level at, is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Melanie, go ahead.
Pam, I was thinking as you were talking that exact same thing. I don't think we will necessarily ever go back to exactly the way it was. I think when this first started, we thought we would, because, okay, this is a short-term thing. Even if we're totally back on campus and everything there, I think we're learning some things from this. And that is exactly one of the things that we're learning. If we can reach more students in a way that helps them, why would we not keep some of these things? Why would we not keep some online things if that gets them either to us in the end or helps them in the end? And I too am a high touch, and I so miss having students coming this summer, because that's why I do what I do. Is I get to be there and see them as you can physically see their lives changing, and you can see them commit and feel like, okay, this is a place I can feel comfortable, even though, oh my gosh, it's 40,000 people, I'll never learn it.
Right.
That change in orientation, right? Because suddenly it's starting to feel smaller because it's becoming familiar, and they're seeing people care, and that's when it feels smaller and accessible and can be them. And I'm scared to death that they're not going to get that. You know, what I can do in orientation, the orientation part is easy in terms of moving it online. And having someone talking at them, they're reading it, great. They get to go back and read it again. They get to reference it. There's some value to the online pieces of it, in terms of like, here's a resource, read about it, take a quiz about it, see a video, easy. What I'm afraid of are those high touch things. Around campus, walking in that door. So anything that we can do to have it go from words to a visual. If it can't be in person, video, anything that they can see movement and hear perspective and not feel like canned, using students to talk to them online, using people in the space online. Some of those might be short term, but again, in the end, I think we'll probably keep some of it. I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, and I think, much of the pandemic, I view a lot of the pandemic as an accelerator. And unfortunately, it's accelerating some bad things, but it can also accelerate some good things. And so I think to the extent, campuses were trying to be more intentional, and certainly, the professionals on this call that at the end of the day are by and large experiential educators, right? And so we were trying to be intentional about what's the delivery method for information, right? And is that best served online, or read a thing or watch a video, versus how do you really value that in-person time and really maximize that in-person time to the thing that can't be done, right, in other mediums. And I believe the pandemic will just accelerate all of that. And if campuses don't accelerate it, the incoming students will accelerate it, because these high school students who've now had an experience of education at home for an entire spring term, whatever that looked like for them. I mean, maybe, I have data point of 2, right? I have 2 high schoolers in my house. They will have no patience for, sitting around getting information that they could get online. They do want to show up. They miss the connections like all of you are talking about, but they're going to want that to be a highly engaging social interaction that's fun. And again, I think the building blocks are all there in both of these professions, right? The building blocks of engagement, of a sense of belonging, of building community. And I think the pandemic is just giving us an opportunity to really accelerate that, really go deeper on those goals and strategies. And so there is as much as a lot of this is truly awful, I'm hopeful that, higher ed in general, and, specifically today to these 2 groups, will emerge stronger and better than ever, right? We will show up as an even better version of ourselves in service to our students and our campus communities.
I would add 2 things also. The first thing is, I think we need to be careful. I know we are excited about how great events have been in the past. And I think we need to be careful about, last year we had all this, but we can't, but we're going to do this for you. We've got to be really careful that they're not feeling shortchanged, because they already do. And I think we need to be really intentional, just having teenagers, if they're passionate about sports and they want to find recreation, they will go online and they will find it. But we need to meet students on social media. I mean, they're going to be on their phone, and we need to make it engaging. And once we decide we're doing something in person, or we know what path we're going to follow, we need to make sure that we're meeting them where they are so they get that information, and we need to make it engaging and get them excited about it. I think that our marketing department does an amazing job entertaining and grabbing students where they are, even if they weren't looking for it. And that's important.
Yeah, and Kelly, I think you bring up an important point of sometimes you have to let go of the pivot and just do the new thing. And especially I think in the marketing and branding of something, and there's a lot of talk about this in the association space, right? Rather than, using your conference branding, let's say from the conference that got canceled into a virtual space, let go of that branding and let the new virtual thing be its own thing with its own value proposition, with its own measures of success. And I imagine as you rethink about some of your programming, yes, sometimes you do want to continue to use that same brand because it's very powerful, right? But at other times, it just needs to be the new thing. So everyone can come in with fresh eyes, fresh expectations, a fresh sense of what the value will be in this experience. Thank you for bringing that up.
And I do think that we've learned great things through this experience that we will carry forward. When there's a new normal, there's another catchphrase. But when we go back to being able to do things, we've learned a lot about engagement and building community when you can't be in community. And I think we'll take those forward for years in how we practice engagement in higher education.
Yeah, it's been interesting. to watch esports in this time, right? Because, you know, all of a sudden here was an industry that knows how to build community online really, really well. And even those that thought, you know, esports was just, you know, they'd never touch it with a 10-foot pole, found themselves, you know, looking to that as a way to engage, or at least learn lessons of engagement, you know, for online delivery or digital delivery. All right, there's some great chat about, you know, and thinking about, you know, structuring and organizing in smaller groups. How do you schedule all that? So there's some good software suggestions out in the chat. We've done a lot of talking about all that we need to do for students. And so I want to turn a little bit to what we need to do for our staff. Right? You know, what's their comfort level with coming back to campus and engaging and being around people, either their other staff or the students? And how are you thinking about that, managing that? How are you managing, you know, are you all coming back at once? Are you going to rotate staff through so that if, you know, God forbid there's an outbreak, you have some subsets to isolate? And I didn't ask my panelists this question before we got on the call, so it's a little bit of a surprise. So I'll invite the audience for anyone to jump in around how they're thinking about managing staff through this return to campus process. And Stephanie, if no one speaks up, you're on my screen 1. I'm going to ask you to speak up. Yeah, go ahead and jump in, Stephanie, if you don't mind. I know you've thought a lot about this.
I'll be honest, I have a 6-year-old. Repeat your question.
Oh, okay, no problem. So we're talking about staffing and, you know, will you bring all staff back at once? How are you managing their sense of safety and security and health? Stephanie's at California Baptist, a smaller school in Southern California. How are you thinking about managing your staff through the pandemic?
Well, we had a meeting the other day about this, and we're in the process of figuring it out, but we've talked a lot about separating our teams out and staggering our ability to be in the office. You know, we were scheduled, or not scheduled, we're structured a little differently. We have 2 directors, myself and Tyler Cox, and so he oversees outdoor and intramurals. And so he has his team, and I oversee the building and fitness and our team. And so we're probably going to come in at different times and then have some overlap for our student leader training, some of this orientation activities. But that's been the talk. I don't know yet what the final decision will be, but just based on, as we've said, what Greta faced, staggering will probably be the wisest thing, just so we don't have to shut down again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not avoiding the question. We just have a preference for talking that over internally before revealing anything publicly.
That's fine.
And so we're setting those meetings up this coming week, but we have been giving very, very careful thought to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a part of our, you know, preliminary plan, but we just need to talk internally first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem.
Our university is on track to make an announcement, not next week, I think the week after that. So we've been doing some tiered planning, but until we know exactly what our university is doing, we don't know which plan we'll be on.
Yeah. All right, a little too soon to tell. Okay, I also want to open it up to see, you know, we've talked a lot about the philosophy and the core values around these events and some early thinking from these schools around, you know, how they're approaching the planning process for events this summer and this fall. Is there anyone who's on the other side of the decision-making process and really has their plan, you know, 90% together and put to bed and want to share? Earlier in the chat, we saw some questions around social distancing at RecFest type events. Are there other kind of concrete takeaways we can share for those that are trying to figure out their own plans?
So Pam, this is Anthony from University of Central Arkansas. We do have a plan, and I hate to say it, kind of glad that the Department of Health stepped in because they gave us a lot of mandatory directives is the right word to use, what they're called. And so they helped us narrow our window of what we should and should not, or I say we have to do and cannot do. And then, of course, we took a lot of guidance from our administration from that standpoint.
And so, Anthony, what are some of the key components about that? Is it around size of gathering, social distancing?
The first one is there's the 5 questions. Have you been to like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, New Orleans? The temperature is another one of those. Have you been, have you tested positive, or have you been around somebody that's tested positive? Then there is the 12-foot distance when you are, quote, actively exercising. We look at defining that. And then patrons and workers have to wear masks while you are in the facility, but only staff has to be checked for temperature prior to entering the building. Patrons do not have to be.
It's interesting. Yeah, thank you for that, Anthony. Anyone else want to jump in with some of the concrete things they've implemented or have decided to implement? You can throw it in the chat too, whether it's about temperature checks, social distancing. I know on the recreation side, we're all watching as the fitness industry reopens, as gyms and clubs in town reopen. What are their protocols? How is that working? Oh, that's a great idea, Derek. In the chat, he said they're looking at some team building activities that are socially distanced, like photo scavenger hunts. Anyone else have an idea in that vein?
I do know that our local gyms are not allowed to be open indoors now, but they have been offering outdoor classes. So I think if that's the same, whatever phase we're in the fall, that we could, they're even bringing spin bikes outside, which is actually really nice. So we can definitely think outside the box and do we have plenty of spaces on campus that maybe even could be covered, that we could get people outside.
Yeah. Yeah, Kelly, you bring up a good point, because there's been a lot of talk about, recreation generally has, these facilities and a lot of space, and how can we share some of that space, especially maybe the areas of the rec center that we can't currently use because of social distancing, right? So I hear a lot about, no, there won't be drop-in basketball right in the gym. And so you can certainly repurpose that for recreation, but also a lot of across campus sharing going on with letting other departments use that space. Orientation would certainly be included in that. But I haven't heard as much conversation about how rec might go use spaces outside of their own facilities and fields. Is anyone hearing much about that? To offer some smaller group things, maybe in some space in housing or a quad that's more outside the academic buildings.
Which actually is a win-win, because you end up getting students that don't come to your facility. If they're coming out of class and they see you and you pique their interest, it's great to get outside your buildings.
I hate to sound like a bit of a broken record. Those things are all possibilities, in our thinking. But we're still in that same position of some of the spaces on campus are being repurposed for academic priorities. And some of that clarity is lacking. We don't have reason at this point to think that's going to involve some of our recreation spaces at this point, but recognize that depending upon how this thing cycles, those things can change. And so until we know more about what's happening in our residence halls and athletic venues and other spaces, it's difficult to tie down specifics. And so I think that's why we're centralizing on what can we control right now.
Yeah.
And against that backdrop, what can we do? We also have a standing system of student involvement on advisory committees and planning committees, and we'll likely continue our practice of looking to them, kind of thinking about what you were saying, Pam, what you're seeing in your high schoolers. And we need to know from our students what this climate is now for them and where they're going to respond to the services and programs they feel like they need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Kathy, you mentioned it earlier, you know, enrollment is so up in the air that not only in terms of numbers, but I think in some areas you'll end up with a very different student body, you know, right? Will your international numbers go down? Will the students coming from, you know, thousands of miles away go down? But all of a sudden you have more local students, right? Or students within 100 miles. And, you know, how does that change the makeup of the student body and their needs and wants for engagement? Yeah. Well, thank you to the audience here. There's some great ideas in the chat. Geocaching, maybe that'll have a resurgence. I was thinking about that the other day. Some of the the name is escaping me. That other online game where you would run around with your phone and find things out in nature. I can't remember the name, but super popular for. Janice is laughing. I think she knows what it is.
Pokemon Go.
Pokemon Go, right? You know, maybe that's going to come back, so we can all get outside and find a way to engage online. Yes, thank you, Joe. All right, well, we're going to wrap it up for today. I want to give a huge shout out to our colleagues at NODA, specifically to Joyce Holder, Executive Director, for putting this roundtable together with us. You know, I think all of you know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but you know, recreation and orientation professionals, I think on the majority, if not all campuses, enjoy a really positive relationship. They've been collaborative partners for years on all the ways to engage students together. And, you know, as so much in the world is changing and you all are having to pivot quickly and think of new ideas and do that in collaboration with your campus partners, one of the things that we'll see everyone through this very successfully is the ability to rely on those positive relationships, those shared goals, that same sense of purpose for your students. So NODA and NIRSA enjoy the same relationship, that same positive collaborative relationship that all of you do on your campuses, because of course we're a reflection of what happens there. So big thank you to NODA, big thank you to everyone who joined us on the call today for engaging in the chat, and thank you to everyone from IU and Virginia Tech for sharing your ideas today and fielding questions in this time of the great unknown. I appreciate you willing to put yourself out there and share what you can and not being afraid to say, yep, we don't have that part figured out yet, because that's important to say too. So take care, everyone. Have a nice weekend, and hopefully I'll see you soon.